You know, I really love it when indie comics shine. And this week, they do just that. It's time for another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast.
It's time for the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. The podcast you look forward to for all of your news and reviews of the best comic books hitting stands. Whether it's DC, Batman, Wonder Woman, Marvel, Spider-Man, Image, Spawn, Saga, Boom, Once and Future, Power Rangers, or whatever book or publisher you follow. We cover them all here. This is the place for you. That's right, it's for everyone. This is the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. Let's get it.
Hey folks, it's Theo. Welcome to another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. Got another good episode for you. This week I am sitting with comic book writer Steve Orlando, the Steve Orlando, and we're going to talk about Ryu, the latest Gatchaman one-shot that is out this Wednesday from Mad Cave Studios. So, as you all know, I've been really digging what Mad Cave has been doing with the Gatchaman universe that they have been in partnership with Tatsunoko from Japan in putting together. And so Steve and I, we're going to talk about the real series, or at least the one shot. We're going to also talk about the Galactor miniseries that he did prior to this. And we're going to talk a little bit about wrestling. I did not know he was a huge wrestling fan, and I kind of grew up in wrestling myself. So we kind of kick things off with that. But we're going to finish up talking about Ryu and the latest Gatchaman one shot that is again out this Wednesday at comic shops everywhere. So going to jump into that, and then we're going to get back and we're going to get into my top five. And man, let me tell you, as I mentioned in the pre-intro, I love it when the indie comics, these indie publishers really shine, and they do so this week. They are the predominant copies, or they are the predominant titles that are in my top five for this week. And I say that as someone who grew up in DC and Marvel, especially in DC, being the huge Batman fan that I am. But over the last, maybe the last 10 years, I have gravitated ever so slowly, but ever so happily into the world of indie comics as well. And so I've really been enjoying it. So we're going to go ahead. Hope you enjoy this interview with Steve Orlando. And like I say, when we get back, we'll talk about my top five and honorable mentions for this week. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Steve. I'll see you all on the other side. Hey, it's Theo. I am sitting here with the Steve Orlando. Steve Orlando, how are you? Welcome to the Comic Bin Podcast. How are you?
I'm good, my friend. I'm happy to be on.
All right, so before we start comics, I got to ask this question because I looked at your Blue Sky page, and if you're not following Steve on Blue Sky, you got to do so. But I gotta ask, Sandman, really?
Well, yeah, but give me a little more. That's not a question yet. I guess that is a question. Are you not a Sandman fan?
I am a Sabu fan, okay? In my days with ECW, I was bona fide Sabu and Taz,
Sure.
100%. They put on some of the greatest hardcore matches that you could find, and you mix in a little bit of Shane Douglas here and there, we good, man, but those ECW days were just chef's kiss.
I feel you. I mean, and I do like it. I love that era. Um, I mean, listen, I do like Sabu as well. But there was something about Sandman for me. I mean, the guy was all entrance, you know?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Once that music hit, you just knew it was
Not
over.
exactly not exactly a work rate guy. And I don't think he would take issue with me saying that. But as a persona, I don't know. Yeah, I've always been a fan. Um I mean that's also a little joke though as well, I will say, because that photo is actually from when he was in WCW when he was hardcore hack.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm when you exist in a creative field and the internet is there, Um, Odds are someone will call you a hack sometime in your career. So I'm also having a little bit of fun by having hack as my background there, uh,
Yes. So
with
that
the
that
world.
that that does it for this episode of the Wrestling Bin podcast. So, man, I have been in wrestling since I was, oh my God. My mom would have us. I'm a native to New Orleans, and so we were 100% bona fide Mid-South wrestling, when it was back in the day, and she was friends with several wrestlers, and I knew about kayfabe before kayfabe became a thing because of my mom's interactions with professional wrestlers. So whenever I could get the time to talk to either former wrestlers or fans of wrestling, it's always a gem because it's just pure entertainment when it's done right.
No, for sure. I love it, and it's not so dissimilar from what we do in comics. Actually, worth noting, if you're in New Orleans, I'll be appearing at the New Orleans GalaxyCon, so come by in
And,
person.
and I will be there. That's in
Right on.
July. It is a few weeks after Essence Fest, and I will be there for that as well.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so let's talk a little bit about comics. I don't want to turn this into a wrestling podcast just yet. Um, I have a small complaint that came in through the complaint line, and it's from Theo. Oh, that's me. So few years ago, you put out an original graphic novel, Rainbow Bridge, that pretty much looked at the life of a boy who grew up with his favorite pet who passed. And I just I want to complain in all the best ways because as a fur parent who has been a pet owner all of his life from a kid to now, that really that really got me in the feels. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciated what you did with Rainbow Bridge because I remember my favorite cat to this day. I remember tearing up a vet's office when I found out that they had to put him down because, so I know how a story such as that can really touch upon someone. So I really appreciate the work that you did on Rainbow Bridge and just kudos.
Thank you. Well, listen, first of all, like I said, thank you. I will pass that on to Steve Fox, the co-writer of the series as well. Um, I mean, we're really proud of that book, and it's obviously an emotional read, but hopefully a healing read for people too. I mean, I had lost animals in the past, and other Steve too. I'm Steve too when he does podcasts, but I'm doing this podcast, so he is now Steve too. Um, his family, when he was growing up and to this day, almost exclusively adopted senior animals, mostly senior cats. So this is something that he was very familiar with, and we both felt strongly about, but at the same time wanted to create something uplifting and empowering. So yeah, it came out a few years ago, but let me tell you, I never get sad hearing about these things. It's a challenging topic, but hopefully, by the time you get to the end, as in real life, there's a little bit of closure and there's a little bit of positivity as well.
And the current badness is trying to get into a room he's not supposed to be in right now.
Well, that's what they do. That's
That's
what
what
they
they do. That's what they do.
they
I
cause
tell
trouble.
people, I tell people all the time, I'm a cat owner, and I tell people all the time, they don't have owners, they have staff, and the pay sucks. So he'll be calling me pretty soon to come and do something I'm not supposed to, and I'll do it anyway. There was one other thing that I did not realize until I was doing some research last week. So last year, Image put out Under York, and I didn't realize that you worked as a translator on that two-issue series.
Sort of,
How
sort of.
how so how does that work when you get a book that's already done, even though it's in a different language? How does that work?
Well, so what I do on that is not strictly speaking translation, but that also makes it easier to explain how it works. So what I do is called localizing, and if this was visual art, like if this was like penciled pages, you could equate it to being doing the finishes on someone else's layouts. So because I don't speak Italian, in the case of Under York. But the best translation teams, like I lived in Russia for a while, and like not this will be a deep cut. I don't. This isn't a Russian lit podcast, but I think the best Russian translation team is Pavir and Velikonsky, and that's because one of them is a native Russian speaker who speaks English, and the other is a native English speaker who speaks Russian. So when you do localization, you're kind of affecting that relationship. So in the case of Under York, I work with Studio Arancia. They are in Italy. They speak Italian and they speak English. But of course, if you're not a native speaker, there's always, cultural aspects and idioms and things that might fall through the cracks. So on a book like Under York or a Natural or a Sweet Paprika, because I've done this a lot with the folks at Arancia. I really like Mirka and Davide. They will do an initial translation into English from the Italian, and then what I do is essentially the finishing work. I will go through and make sure that everything that they've done sounds as natural as possible. I'll edit any type of cultural issues that they may not have been aware of because they don't live here.
Hmm.
There are things that, and that often doesn't involve malice, it involves ignorance, either words that maybe they look up and translate, but they don't know how they're connotated here,
Right.
or in some cases they just may not be familiar with the certain cultural aspects of our history in the same way we wouldn't have deep knowledge of Italy's history, So that's what I do on those books, and it's we're all in the same team, just to try to make to get the true core of the story across in the most natural way possible. But yeah, it is. If I were an artist in this hat wearing situation, you would say that I was a finishing artist, and it's very similar, but for dialogue instead.
Gotcha. Yeah, I really enjoyed. I can't wait for the next book to come out after those first two issues. I really enjoyed it. So let's get into our topic for the day.
Sure.
Mad Cave's Gatchaman universe and your role within it. So your first exposure, you were in you contributed to the Free Comic Book Day issue, but then we got Galactor, that four-issue miniseries that focused on Burr Kotsay and him eliminating his potential threats, the threats that he felt were out there coming at him. How were you presented with that picture? How did you pitch that story to Mad Cave?
I'll be honest, it was very easy, for a number of reasons. One, they know that I'm a big fan of the series. I mean, everyone, the good news is, I mean, I hope it comes through in the work, but like between the three writers working on this right now, whether it's Cullen Bunn on the main book or me and Tommy Lee Edwards on the ancillary titles, um, we are all, I mean, we all grew up watching Gatchaman. We also all grew up often watching different versions of it, right? Like many, whether it was G-Force in my case, or
It was Battle of the Planets in mine.
Battle of the Planets for Tommy Lee and Cullen. So we all come from different versions of it, and then we came in when this started, and we watched the entire, whatever the first 105 episodes of the original,
Mhm.
right? Which Tatsunoko was kind enough to furnish us with. And we were in from the start. I mean, like the increased intensity, the everything about the original was just gripping to us. So the good news is we were excited, and Tatsunoko could feel that. There wasn't a lot of pushback on these pitches, and on top of that as well, in the case of something like Galactor, because you'll see what my next miniseries is, and it's a little different. But with Galactor, it was even easier because we had just had this very successful launch of the Energon universe. So for me, I could say, hey, like here's another nostalgia franchise, and I don't mean that as a pejorative, it's just a fact. Uh, here's another nostalgia franchise, and look at how they patterned their launch. You had the GI Joe book, and then you had the Cobra book. So I immediately said, we have Gatchaman. Where is our Galactor book? We need a villain book, and they agreed. And for me, what I do, like looking at things like Midnight, or looking at, shall we say, the more violent and less Rainbow Bridge in type side of my work. Bert Katzit just felt like the character for me to pick up first. And I had a great time on that series. It was really, really fun writing him, and it was really fun getting to work on a villain book, of course, where he's going after people who are even worse. But it was a blast. And yeah, I mean, I can say, like, sometimes working with licensors, it is a bit of a struggle, but um, it hasn't been with the Gatchaman folks. They're excited. They've been excited about what we're doing, and honestly, like with the stuff that we're doing in the one shots outside of the main book, I think it often surprises them even more, because it doesn't necessarily look like the show all the time.
Yeah.
Whether it's my stuff, whether it's the stuff Tommy Lee is doing. This Ryu one shot has its own look. The Joe one shot that's going to come out is with just I can't say who's drawing it, but it's with a superstar artist that loved Gatchaman so much that, to be frank, she took a cut to what she would normally get at Marvel or DC just to work on Gatchaman. And I think when Tatsunoko hears things like that, they get excited. And so with the one shots, things like Galactor, things like this Ryu one shot, things like the forthcoming Joe one shot, we really get to expand this world, both the look and the kinds of stories you tell in this world out. And sometimes licensors are a little uptight about that, but quite the reverse. As long as we don't contradict what happens in those first, whatever, 100, 510 episodes, they're excited to see us go new places and take these characters into new situations.
Now, I remember asking Robert Kirkman over at the Indigon universe as well, but I also asked Cullen this as well when I interviewed him about Godman and this universe at Mad Cave. What do you think is behind this renaissance? Because we see a whole bunch of classic animated IPs that are now hitting a comic book page. Where's that renaissance coming from?
I think that, I mean, to be frank, I think that some of it is I don't want to say boring, but perhaps an anthropological or sociological answer versus a creative one. The age group that is hit with this is getting hit by these types of properties, or came up watching these types of properties, are now in an age bracket where in theory they have, they're relatively comfortable, and that means they can, yeah, they do more luxury spending. I think there is something to that, in the same way that you saw, I don't know, like you saw a resurgence of, I mean, every once in a, when I was younger in the 90s and early 2000s, you saw a resurgence in things that were probably about 10 to 15 to 20 years older than the stuff that you're seeing now. In the case of things like Transformers, I'll be honest, I think that's evergreen because, yes, G1 is a nostalgia project, but there's Transformers content right now, you know. But in the case of something like Gatchaman, I think I'll be honest, like I pleasantly surprised, especially because a lot of people know it, but not as Gatchaman.
Right.
And so, but I think I think there is, anytime there's a big nostalgia boom, um, I think that you can look at, yeah, I mean, you can look at socioeconomic factors, you can look at cultural factors. People want to remember, the more stressful the present is, the more people want to remember the past. But at the same time, um, that's why I was quick to say that's not a pejorative. Like, nostalgia gets you through a couple issues. The books have to be good, right? So I think we're moving beyond that now. And hopefully the goal, especially with these side books that look a little different, is that there's people that are meeting the Gatchaman characters for the first time. That's the real hope. Of course, in addition to welcoming in longtime fans, um, because these are great characters. It's a great world, and we want to expand even beyond the reach that they have when we started.
So you now going into your second world of Gotcha Man. Out this Wednesday on comic book shelves, we have Ryu, the one
Yeah.
shot focusing on the character. most commonly known as the pilot. So I've had the opportunity to read it already, and I want to thank the guys at Mad Cave for sending me a review copy.
Yeah, those guys are all right.
Yeah, those guys are wonderful. I love those guys. Was it important for you to really have Ryu by himself in this one shot? Because in the Ken one shot, the team was there. They were all undercover. In in the June one shot, they showed up in the beginning before she trekked off into our own mission. But he's on his own. I don't want to spoil the issue, but this is his story. Was it important that because of that stigma of being the pilot, that he had to do this on his own from start to finish?
Yes, I mean, I think the pilot stigma is a symptom of that. But with any of these characters, I mean, the Joe one shot, I will say he's also on a solo mission. Um, I think the further you get away from the quote unquote main character, which I would argue, I don't think I'm making news in saying that's Ken and then probably Joe. Um, the less you know them, right? Because they're in the spotlight less. And even a character like Joe, I'll be honest, I mean, I make jokes all the time. Like, do we really know that much about him besides he really wants to fire a bird missile, like really bad? Um, a little bit more. But because of the format of the main show, you don't get to see people like Ryu off on their own that much. You don't get to see many of the characters off on their own that much, especially outside of the established settings. So for me, going into these one shots, which for me, I'm doing, of course, Ryu, I'm doing Joe, I'm also doing Dr. Nambu. It was important to take these characters somewhere that you could never see them in the cartoon, not just as a way to analyze who they are, because that's what they deserve, right? Like if you're picking up the Ryu one shot, to be frank, the team book is the team book. You want to know more about who this guy is and what makes him tick. Um, Focusing in and taking them out of where you expect them helps you do that, but also it just does the work of what I think any comic book adaptation should do. We need to give folks stuff that they can't get in the cartoon or the TV show. We need to give more. We need to go bigger and wilder. And that's especially in the case of the Ryu one shot. What I was really excited we could do, with we could introduce a whole new set of enemies for the Gatchaman squad and play off stuff from the show, like how many mechs are destroyed. I'm trying not to spoil what happens in the book.
Right.
But yeah, I think the key is like with any case, you have to find that one thing that is going to drive the character off into these solo missions. With Ryu, it is the idea and the perception and his own sort of wrestling with the fact that people view him as the pilot of the ship and little more. With Joe, you'll see that it is going to be more about something family related. His family has these questionable ties to Galactor from the show, and that's kind of a pressure point for him. And you'll see that played off in his solo book, where we get to go to the Gatchaman rules version of Italy. It's where he's drawn back there. So with Ryu, this was his pressure point, right? This is the thing we could lean on to help us analyze who he is and show folks what he does that's unique from the rest of the team. And of course, you do that by having him break that very supposition. We start with this idea, and then the events of the book, of course, prove otherwise.
So I asked Tommy Lee when I interviewed him about Only One Earth. I'm going to ask you this as well. Where does your miniseries or one shots fit into this whole Gotcha Man universe, or does it need to?
Um, I am not trying to dodge your question, but I also want to make sure I'm answering it correctly. So do you mean in a literal, like what episode sense or more general?
More general.
Yeah, well, but the answer is sort of the same. The goal for this is to tell stories that fit in between the cracks of the first, again, like 104, 110 episodes. So you won't see us revealing stuff that goes beyond that, at least not right now. Um, and for these one shots, to me, yeah, I mean, these are the hope is that much like watching the show, for the most part, you could read them in any order. They are taking place in between the existing events of the show. And that goes for the main book as well. So, hypothetically, if we do our job, if you pick up the at least the character focus one shots, um, they can happen in between any of the arcs of the book or any of the episodes of the show. The hope is that they're evergreen in that way. Um, the Galactro miniseries, I would argue the same. I mean, we know it takes place in parallel to the main storyline because we hinted that in the first issue. But at the same time, if you just picked up the Galactro book and had a cursory knowledge of Gatchaman, that could be any Galactor attack, right? It could be any Gatchaman rescue. So the hope is that these are timeless one shots, the and timeless minis and stories that lean on the character. At least that's my hope, and that are siloed enough and clean enough that they can fit in between any arc of the main book or of course any episode of the cartoon show.
So you mentioned Tatsunoko a little earlier, the owners of the Gatchaman IP. How 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 is the relationship with them? Do they give any pushback on any of the ideas? Like, you may want to introduce a character and they're like, no, 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 no. Or you want to take a story in a different line and no, 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 no. How how is that relationship working with those guys?
I mean, they've been very supportive. I have done a lot of licensed work, whether it is, whether it's perhaps the more obvious stuff like DC or Marvel, but also stuff like, I helped launch Power Rangers with Kyle Higgins. I've worked on Godzilla, I've worked on Transformers. I've been around, and I think. With Tatsunoko, they've been extremely supportive of us taking these characters in new places and new things. They're mostly, and when they do step in, it is for guardrails,
Mhm.
but they're not necessarily creative guardrails so much as canon guardrails. And that's what I want. We don't want to blow up the main show. At the same time, as creators, we need to push it as far as possible. And then, in the creative version of asking for forgiveness rather than permission.
Mhm.
And it honestly, it's happened very rarely. If we get notes or I get notes at least, it's usually, oh well, this exceeds the level of technology on the show, or this exceeds some small detail that um a lore master would know. I mean, most franchises these days have a person designated as their lore master. Tatsunoko has one for Gatchaman. um Star Wars has one, Pablo Hidalgo, because I've worked on that too. And while they give notes, look, they're also an amazing resource because these are folks that have the answer to every single question you could ever want. So with that, to me, is more how the relationship has been. They've been a resource, and they've been extremely, extremely supportive.
Okay, great. So when you was first paired with Ricardo to work on the art for the one shot, how how was that how was that collaboration? How did y'all, because again, he's on the other side of the Atlantic. How was that collaboration and that feedback going back and forth? Did anything he put on the page cause you to maybe rethink what you had on the script?
Um, well, not really, but that is because that's not necessarily my style. Like you script a book. Ricardo was not assigned to this book when I scripted it, so I did not know exactly who was going to be drawing it. But even if I did, um, I, without shading my peers, there's a lot of ways to get a comic book done, and I consider myself the first baton holder or the second baton holder, if you want to count editorial. But I'm not the team captain. I'm just part of the team. So uh, it's rare that I would ever sort of like. Other than if something like broke a story, I want artists to get excited and take risks and maybe take things in surprising directions. So I'm much more of a yes and type person
Mhm.
as a creator. Unless, of course, again, like if something's there for a story reason and that doesn't end up in the page, yes, I'll lean in and say, hey, like let's try to fit this in here. But otherwise, um, I consider my job is to entertain and excite my artistic collaborators. They are our first audience, and then let them cook. So Ricardo did surprise me with a lot of his layouts. with some of the places he took the designs, especially the main villain. Um, but that's good. I try to leave a lot of room in my scripts for artists to cook because, again, I want to be respected in what I do best. I feel like it's my absolute obligation to give that same respect to my peers. So, like, it's going to sound silly, but my job after a script is in, for the most part, I think I got to get out of the way and let the people I work with do their best work possible. If I didn't think they could do that, why the hell am I working with them?
Who's your favorite Gatchaman character?
Look, sorry about that. Look, it is Burkatza. I can't lie. I think he's a delicious villain. If you want me to answer as someone on the team, it's probably Joe. We're very similar in personality. I've never fired a bird missile, but I've also been described as gruff and somewhat irritable in my time. So if I had to pick a team member, it would be Joe. But if I had to pick a cast member, it's absolutely Burt Katzak because I'm also extremely arch and melodramatic, and I wear purple from time to time.
Okay. Is it easier writing evil? I mean, because as a wrestling fan, we always ask the question, is it easier to be a face or a heel? And we always get the response, it's always more enjoyable being the heel in the wrestling world. Is it funner writing the bad guy?
Well, fun, yes. Easier, I think it's equally hard or easy, because the fact is, other than like extremely primal characters like a dark side or something like that, the bones to a villain character are the same as a heroic character. You still have to know why, you still have to know like what drives them, and all those things. So the work is relatively the same. More fun. Yeah, I mean, I had a blast because Burkatza is a sadistic person. I mean, we had him torturing a dude in the front of a Galactor sports car. Um, but to bring it around to wrestling, though, like as you said, even heels, yes, it's more fun, but the ones that are most effective, you have to know why.
Yeah,
Like like Drew, for example, Drew McIntyre, uh, spent last year doing amazing heel work, and he spent last year doing amazing heel work because it didn't feel forced. Everything he said had a point. He was just
yeah,
being an asshole about it.
yeah,
Versus when someone goes heel because someone said that they need to go heel. And they come out and they usually cut some sort of standard promo. Oh, the fans turned on me and all this shit, but they didn't. Like you're making it up. If something's just in someone's head, it's not that that doesn't work, but it's not necessarily as smooth. Like I think Drew is one of the most effective heels in a long time because everything he said really did happen to him. He was just taking it like an absolute piece of shit.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, and I've said it many times. When those promos ended, Drew told no lie. All these things that he said happened, yeah, they kind of happened.
Yeah, the issue is he was taking it out on random people and all those things. It was how he was acting on it. But I think he was even more effective because he had a motivation you could relate to. And in the case of Katza, he um we leaned on this secret he's harboring that leader X is lording over his mutantdom over him as this sort
Yeah,
of and even though he's a terrible person, hopefully you sympathize because that he was still essentially afraid of himself, and that's why he's doing all these things. And you see how it's bent him into this loyal servant. As fun as hopefully the series was, hopefully it's a little tragic too, because he's still at most aspiring to be second fiddle because he doesn't see any more for himself. So that's the hope with him. But it's certainly ease is about the same, but yeah, it's fun writing someone who does what we maybe sometimes wish we could do, but know better than.
and they also and he also has that typical villain speak, that trope of I'm not really a villain. I'm trying to bring Earth into its best form, and just the way that he and Galacto are looking at doing it just doesn't it's not right, but he sees himself as a bad guy, but is he really? So
No, I think so. I think that, I mean, most villains don't think they are villains, as you said. They think they're the hero of their own story. And at the same time, that's not a rule. It is, of course, rules can be broken. Sometimes the greatest villains don't think that at all. Again, someone like Darkseid, someone like the Joker. But that has to stand out in contrast to everyone around them. I mean, you can only pull that card so many times. I look at early depictions of Loki when he was basically just evil because he was evil versus how complex he's gotten now in the intervening 60 years as a character. And I think that says it all.
So I want to be respectful of your time. Again, Ryu is out this coming Wednesday. If you haven't pre-ordered it, I implore you to get to your comic shop and get a copy. How would you pitch this to someone who's sitting on the fence as to whether or not they should pick this up?
Sure. Well, if you are an existing Gatchaman fan and you're looking to pick this up, I'll be it's borderline spoiler territory, but whatever, I'll tell you, this is going to take Ryu to somewhere you've never seen before, and it's going to it opens up the Sea Locusts, an entirely new set of antagonists for the Gatchaman world. It is Ryu against his own set of villains as the guardian of Yacht Harbor. And the Sea Locusts, I think, are just a super, super cool concept and enemy for especially Ryu, a mechanic and a pilot to fight. I'm not spoiling the story to say that they're in it. These are people who salvage and make um, sci-fi pirate ships out of the wrecks of Galactor mechas, right? They are scavengers who serve this horrific undersea force that needs to feed on technology, but spurns human life or spurns human flesh and organic matter. So if you are a Gatchaman fan, well, we're opening up a whole new part of the Gatchaman world, and you should be there. And if you are just saying, who is this Ryu guy? I'm a big fan of owls or whatever else has brought you to the dance. Um, Great, because you'll find everything you need to know in this book, and you will also just find a kick-ass science fiction blockbuster, an undersea science fiction blockbuster that is one part classic sci-fi manga slash anime, because this is a comic based on anime, and one part like Lovecraft in the most unexpected way. So if you're new in, come for the sci-fi Lovecraft, stay for finding out why Gatchaman and Rio were great. And if you're a Gatchaman fan, get in there to explore a part of the Gatchaman world that you've never seen before.
Great. Steve Orlando, how can fans keep up with what you're working on? How can fans follow you?
Sure. Well, I am still on Blue Sky, as you said. I'm the Steve Orlando on Blue Sky. I did have to, I mean, like that is my main sort of interface right now. I'm on Instagram, though if you want comic stuff, Blue Sky is your spot. If you want to see my random art interests and things, that's kind of what you'll find on Instagram. I don't do a lot of work there, but I am there. For business announcements, yes, you can look at my Wikipedia, of course, but Blue Sky is the place that I'm currently like very reachable right now, and I'm happy to talk.
All right. Well, Steve Orlando, thank you so much. As we always do before we end our show, it is time for rapid fire.
Let's do it.
We have two choices. You get to pick one. There's no wrong answer. Ready?
Hit me with as many as you want.
All right. So, Midnighter edition. Midnighter with the Authority and Stormwatch or Midnighter with the Bat Family?
Authority and Stormwatch.
Okay. Wrestling edition. AEW or WWE?
For
This is
me,
not this is not tribalism. This is just
I mean, lol. Okay, girl. Everything is tribalism in wrestling. But no, AEW if forced.
okay. Scarlet Witch or Zatanna?
Oh, I mean Scarlet Witch.
Okay. Voltron or Gundam?
Oh, I mean, I love Gundam, but Voltron. Come on now. For someone who's about to turn 40, the answer is Voltron.
All right. Last one, and this is the one that goes to everyone. Batman the Animated Series or Justice League Unlimited?
Superman the animated series.
Neither, huh? Superman is the one for you, right?
I mean, I love Batman the animated series. Uh, so if those are my choices, that's the answer. But the real answer is flip the table for Superman the animated series. In my case, the one of the cherished items in my house is one of the original hand painted plates from the Jack Kirby episode of Superman the animated series. So
Oh, that's awesome.
it would be extremely hard for me not to say that. But again, if I must choose from your menu, I love Justice League Unlimited. Susan Eisenberg is a friend, and that cast are some of the nicest people you can ever meet at a show. But I would have to say Batman the Animated Series between those two.
Okay. Steve Orlando, thank you so much for joining me here on the Comic Ben Comic Book Podcast. I truly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So again, I want to thank Steve Orlando for taking the time to sit with me to talk about Gatchaman Ryu. Gatchaman Ryu Scavengers is out on bookshelves this coming Wednesday from Mad Cave Studios. If you are a Gatchaman fan, make sure you get to your comic shop and pick it up if you haven't ordered it already. I've been enjoying absolutely everything that Mad Cave has been doing with this new Gatchaman universe, whether it's the main series from Cullen Bunn, the one shots and Only One Earth from Tommy Lee Edwards, or the one shots and the Galactor miniseries from uh, Steve Orlando as well. And of course, we still have Jinpei, which Tommy Lee is working on, and we have Joe, who has his one shot coming up that Steve Orlando is doing. So we still got a good ways to go in just fleshing out and growing this reintroduction of the Gatchaman universe to comic book readers. So again, get out there and support it. I absolutely have been loving everything about it, and I hope you do as well. It's been a joy for me being someone who grew up watching Battle of the Planets. And as I mentioned, I, I recently got the complete original Gatchaman series that I am going to be cracking open and watching. Just from the early watch that I've been doing in some of the episodes, it's it's really what Battle of the Planets should have been, but of course, a lot of stuff that came from Japan back in the day was tamed down, because of censorship in the United States. So, a lot of that stuff we might be able to get away with it now, but back in the 70s and 80s, that just wasn't gonna fly. But again, uh, thank you to Steve Orlando for sitting with me to talk about Gatchaman Ryu Scavengers, which is again out on shelf this coming Wednesday. And I also want to thank him for correcting me on the correct pronunciation. I was in Street Fighter mode calling him Ryu, but it's Ryu. So pick it up. I'll be getting mine from DCBS once my monthly order come in, as it always does. But truly enjoyed it. So again, thank you to Mad Cave for setting everything up, and thank you to Steve for sitting with me. I plan on seeing him when he comes to New Orleans for GalaxyCon, and we'll probably be talking up wrestling while that's going on as well. So again, thanks to Steve for that. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and get into my top 5 books for this past week. Again, it is heavy with indie publishers, but it's really been a good week for them, and I really, really been enjoying what's been going on the indie side of things. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and just jump right into my top 5. Okay, in the number 5 spot, Gatchaman, Only One Earth, number 3, written by Tommy Lee Edwards with art from Nuno Plate over at Mad Cave Studios. So we continue this adventure with Joe and with Ken with the Princess of Adrena as they make their way through these caverns, these underground caverns, and on the country island that is currently being destroyed by Galactor. But in this issue, we learn a lot more about the people of Adrena and kind of how they got to be where they are. Uh, we learned that the ancient Adrenans, lived underground. They kind of worship this fungus that Joe and Ken have been seeing all around these caverns, and this fungus, this material, kind of gave life to the world above. And in the end, while it greatened the life of those that lived on the surface, it really also destroyed them. And you can kind of see where the story is going and how, because of them not taking care of their land the way they should have, this fungus, started to become toxic. And so it destroyed, much of what was in these underground caverns and forced those that were living underground to leave and pretty much close it up until the likes of Galactor made their way into the caverns to build this super mecha that is kind of being powered by this fungus, but it's also being powered psychically. And we see the princess and Joe get into this almost like this trance as they meditate, and she tells him more about her ancient people. And by the time it's all said and done, Berkasi has arrived with his ship, and they're destroying everything that's within Adrena. And Ken, and Gemma, who's the princess, are, really trying to find their way out. And, you know, Joe, because of this trance that he was in, he kind of passes out. And when he awakens, he finds that they've they've turned on one of these mechas that Galactor was building in this underground cavern. And Gemma has basically connected herself to this robot and is basically controlling it psychically. You get to this page where the cables are connected to her head, connected to her arms, and we're going to see how that plays out, because what we saw in most of this is that some of the individuals who pilot this thing didn't make it. And so we're going to see a battle in the final issue number 4, simply because as we get to the end of issue 3, Burkase, basically turns the ship that he's in into this huge mecha. It's to this huge mech robot that, I'm pretty sure we're going to see a battle as the rest of the Science Ninja team attempts to slow him down. Again, they're not at full power with the God Phoenix, simply because Joe's ship G1 has not connected. So we will see how it all plays out in issue number 4, which comes out, I believe, next month. The art continues to be just really good. Again, one of the things that I've continually said about the Gatchaman universe is that the different styles have really set the tone for it, and the art for each of the writers that have had their own world. As you saw in the conversation I had with Steve Orlando, it really complements the writing style of the writer. And it's the same case here with the art from Nuno Pilati, and how it's this dark tone, which kind of goes along with the writing style of Tommy Lee Edwards, and they really do work well together. So I can't wait until the final issue to see how this battle turns out. I hope it doesn't mean the end of Gemma, as she has to take care of her country. She has now become of age and is supposed to ascend to the throne, but we shall see what happens. But that is my number 5 book for this week. Gatchaman, Only One Earth, number 3. written by Tommy Lee Edwards with art from Nuno Pilate over at Mad Cave Studios. Okay, in the number 4 spot, I Lie Popeye number 4, written and drawn by Marcus Williams with colors from Rodney Belchez over at Massive Publishing. It's been a while, but we finally get to the penultimate issue after Massive went and handled everything with moving over from Diamond to Luna Distribution to get their titles out. So we get this 4th issue, and if you can remember from my conversation with Marcus Williams a while back as we talked about the series, we spoke about what happened at the end of issue 3 with Wimpy showing up and interfering in the fight that Popeye was having with the sister and brother. And we now see what really happened because, I was questioning, what the hell happened with Wimpy. He's all of a sudden now turning on Popeye. Well, we now see he's actually under the control of someone else. Someone off somewhere is controlling Wimpy and having him interfere and attack Popeye and the team. But we also learned that there is now a new target, and that new target is Sweet Pea. And so there is more fighting going on, and eventually the sister and brother duo, they are able to snatch up Sweet Pea and take him off. But what we see, and it kind of goes back to my conversation that I had with Marcus, is we learn this backstory of Olive Oil and her family. And it comes due to basically a story and research from the Sea Hag. And we learn now that Olive Oil is descendant from a family of witches. And according to the Sea Hag, it's a family of powerful witches. And so this is kind of what we spoke about when Marcus was mentioning, learning more about characters that we may not have known in older iterations of comics or watching the old cartoons. And we're now able to flesh out a story of Olive Oil to where she is more than what we expect. And that's going to really come into play as we get into the final issue, as she and Popeye go out there and attempt to rescue Sweet Pea. There was this other scene, however, where, Popeye is really down on himself. And it takes a conversation from someone that you really wouldn't have expected to really get him to kind of see things the way they need to be seen again. And that was from Bluto. And, he basically tells Popeye he should be feeling down because he was beaten once, by this enemy from nowhere. Whereas, all the times Bluto has been beaten by Popeye in the past. And so, he uses that to really try to pick up and pep up what Popeye is feeling right now. And then Poop Deck Pappy comes behind him and, really gives him a good talking to as well. So we now know that Sweet Pea is the key to all of this because there's some type of being within Sweet Pea that is really more powerful than anything, including what was expected of Popeye. And now, as we go into this final issue, when it comes out, we're going to see what happens as Popeye, with the help of the now magical Olive Oil, goes after and rescue Sweet Pea from this being. And I'm wondering if it's someone, if not necessarily from Popeye's past, but maybe Olive Oil's past, who's under that helmet. But we shall see. I don't think it's any type of robotic monster or anything. I think it might be someone from either one of Popeye or Olive Oil's past or future. So we shall see how that all plays out. Now, the last piece, on the art, I'm a huge fan of Marcus Williams. Always has been a fan of the work of art that he does in his drawing style. He really brings his influence in anime and manga into this comic, and I absolutely love it. And again, the colors from Rodney Velchez just adds to that brilliance. It's a really, really, really good compliment to the style of art that Marcus does, and I really really love it. It's a good story, but it's phenomenal art, and I will always be a fan of the art from Marcus Williams. But that is the number 4 book for this week. I Lie Popeye number 4 from Marcus Williams and Rodney Velchez over at Massive Publishing. All right. In the number 3 spot, Wonder Woman number 20, written by Tom King with art from Gillian March over at DC Comics. We have a murder mystery at hand. Ares has been killed, and Hippolyta, mother of Diana, has been accused of the murder. I mean, he was found dead with a knife in his back in her bed. So there's this thought, however, that Hippolyta may not have actually done this. And so Diana goes and seeks help from the one person who she trusts most to get to the bottom of it. And that is the world's greatest detective, Batman. And, he hesitantly does this because, yeah, he's the world's greatest detective, just not of Diana's world. And the idea of, a god being dead is just weird. Usually when something like that happens, they are, sent to the underworld where Hades is. But, we get to this story now where Batman and Wonder Woman goes to Zeus and, requests, permission to investigate the death of Ares to get to the bottom of it, whether it's Hippolyta who actually did it or if it's someone else. Now, to make it a little bit more interesting to Zeus, because we all know how the gods have always had fun with, playing with the mortals of the world. So to make it a little bit more interesting to Zeus, Batman basically says, if I cannot solve this murder within 24 hours, I will offer myself my life as a sacrifice. And it really sets Diana off, but Zeus agrees. And so they go off and they begin investigating this murder. They go and interview several other gods on Mount Olympus, including Dionysus and Aphrodite, who gets a nice little kiss out of Bruce. It kind of sets Diane off a little bit with the look she gave. I wonder how Selena would feel. But for me, this is a really good story because one of the things that I've really enjoyed, and if you haven't heard my interview with Al Ewing over at the Batman universe with the specials episode that I did, as we talked about the Detective Comics annual that is coming out next week. I love a good detective story in comics. It is one of the things that made me a Batman fan as a kid. Being a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, I fell in love with Batman because of that. And so, in Detective Comics, in that annual, we get a true detective story. And now we get another one here as Bruce and Diana, go out to find who actually killed Ares. Now we have this new caveat though as the issue comes to an end where someone has stolen one of Zeus's lightning bolts and have basically taken Batman out. And so now this sets Diana on a new separate mission as they also try to solve this murder. But she also wants to find who attacked Batman. in the course of trying to set them off their track. Zeus admits it wasn't him, but he doesn't lay off of Batman's agreement. You know, there's still a murder he has to solve, or Batman's gonna die. But Diana, as Batman recuperates, you know, she's on a mission to find out who attacked him, and she's looking for revenge. She's looking to fight someone. And, you know, as she sits there and she prays and swears that she's going to find who did this and make them pay, I can only wonder what's going to happen next as they try to get to the bottom of what happened to Ares, and, you know, whether or not it was actually Hippolyta or someone else. But you would think, considering someone behind the scenes is stealing Zeus's lightning and attacking Batman to try to throw them off course, it's probably someone else. And I can't wait to see what happens as we get to the end of this mini arc. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the art as well. Uh, I have always been a fan of Gillian March, going all the way back to his days with drawing the Gotham City Sirens. I am I am truly impressed with the evolution of his art. People have kind of been down on him in the past because of how sexualized some of his character depictions have been, which may or may not be a fair argument. But we can see in this new world of comics how he has evolved his style of drawing to really be beautiful, and I really enjoy what he does here. As a matter of fact, he did one of the variant covers as well. And as much as I am a fan of Daniel Sampier's cover for this issue, I ended up getting the variant cover as I ended up getting the variant cover from Gilliam March. I really love the way he draws both Bruce and Diana in this stylized way that is kind of kind of signifies his evolution as an artist, you know. And you know, he's the type of artist that does his own colors. So this was all just a really good issue, and I truly enjoyed it. And again, that says a lot considering I have not been on the best of terms with Tom King going all the way back to Batman number 50. But I really enjoy what he's been doing with Wonder Woman. I've been following it since he's been on it. So I can't wait to see where we go next in this murder mystery, this detective story in the pages of Wonder Woman. But that is my number 3 book for the week. Wonder Woman number 20 from writer Tom King, artist Gilliam March, over at DC Comics. All right, in the number 2 spot, Star Trek Defiant number 26, written by Christopher Cantwell with art from David Tinto over at IDW Publishing. This is part 2 of the Lore War, which looks at both Star Trek and Star Trek Defiant, as Lore has basically rewritten the universe in his own liking. But we see in part 1, which was the Lore War issue that came out last week, I believe, we see that Kahless 2 is still around, and he knows what goes on, and he wakes up Benjamin Sisko, and he and Cisco on the trek to kind of get things back in order. But they have a stowaway in Beverly Crusher who they bring along with them. But we see in this issue with part 2 of Lore War, Lore has basically rewritten First Contact, the history of First Contact. And we know from Star Trek lore that First Contact was done between Zephyr Cochrane and the Vulcans, who saw his ship, the Phoenix, make history in achieving warp speed. And so that's what we know to be First Contact. However, lore has rewritten this history so that now First Contact was actually him introducing himself to Zephram Cochrane. And that's the history of First Contact. Now, what we also know from issue 2 is that since First Contact, there has been no human on Earth that has left the planet. It's been forbidden. And so what happens is Cisco and Kalis commandeers the Phoenix along with Beverly, and they go out and they basically steal the ship from under Laura's nose. And they do that simply by distracting Data. And they do that because Cisco has basically rewritten this program in the Matrix that kind of watches over everything for Data, and he basically recreates Spot, Data's pet cat, and that little distraction was just enough for the ship to be stolen, and they are taken off. Um, Elsewhere, we see the Enterprise and the Defiant as they are going at it with the Marquise, and we know the Marquise to be this this combination or this assimilated race of the Borg and the Vulcans. But as we get this story, we learn that the Borg didn't necessarily attack and assimilate the Vulcans into the collective. It was almost the other way around. The Vulcans willfully accepted the Borg, and as they became a part of the collective, they opened up some things that the collective would not have typically seen in the normal universe. And so that allowed the Marquise to form and continue to just be this thorn in the side of Lore, who has recreated the universe multiple times due to the Vulcans. And Data constantly reminds him that we can't recreate the universe without them because it will set off cataclysmic uh, errors within life and within life of the universe, even if it is in Lore's creation. So Lore, goes and basically blows up this star that takes out and destroys the Defiant, but it also takes out the Marquise as well. However, Hugh and Spock are able to escape. But what happens in the end is that we see that Ensign Sasso, who is a undercover member of the Marquise as well, she is talking to Data, and it almost seems as if those two are in cahoots. Data kind of knows she's up to something, and he is allowing her to do so. Not necessarily doing anything to stop her, but we see that she has found Talir, and he has not been turned. He actually recognizes himself as a member of Starfleet. So something must have happened to where, you know, in Lore's recreation of the universe, he felt that he couldn't turn or lose the memories of Talir, and in turn, he keeps him in a prison. And we it was funny in how Sato is basically leading Data on to what she's doing, which makes me wonder whether or not Data is more than what he is. Right now, the story is that he's kind of under Lore's control, because of all the events that happened leading up to Lore War. But something tells me that the Lore's control over Data isn't what he think it is. And like I said, where Data may not be directly in cahoots against his brother, he's allowing Sato and the Marquise to do what they, do what they're doing. And like I said, Sato is able to find Talir, and we will see how that all plays out. Especially considering, the Phoenix is on track to get out there and meet up with folks as well. The art continues to be good, and Defiant continues to be my favorite Trek book compared to the main Trek series. So we shall see how things play out. Part 3 is out this week with Star Trek, which is out on Wednesday. And we only got two more parts after that as Star Trek and Star Trek Defiant come to its end as this iteration of the series comes to an end over at IDW, but we know more is to come. But I've absolutely have loved Defiant from the start. I will be following along with Star Trek as well to see how Lore War comes to an end. Because there's some stuff that's really going on. Cisco was going to look for the Bajorans and the Bajoran prophets and find out that they're not there. So we shall see what his next step is as, he attempts to wake up the universe to see that things aren't what they're supposed to be. But we see that the pieces are coming together. So that is my number 2 book for the week. Star Trek Defiant, number 26, from writer Christopher Cantwell, with art from Debbie Tinto over at IDW Publishing. All right, we have reached our final stop in our weekly comic book ride, my number 1 book for this week. And for my number 1 book, we're going to stay at IDW. My number 1 book this week, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 8. Written by Jason Aaron with art from Ron Ferreira. Man, just when I think that Jason Aaron could not get me even more ingrained with this series, he pulls it off. And I have been loving it since he's taken over this series with issue 1 of this new volume. So this is part 2 of this New York City versus the Turtles story arc that's going on. And Leonardo is really narrating what's going on, and he is truly concerned with what's going on with his brothers, particularly with Donatello. Donnie has not been himself since issue 4 when he made his return in this series. And we know that he has really been having some really strong issues, especially mentally. If you can remember issue 4, he was trapped in that cage at the animal park where he was basically forced to fight, and he fought willfully and willingly to ensure that the other mutant animals that were there didn't have to. And so it really took a toll on him, not just mentally, but physically. We see compared to the other turtles with his brothers that, he is very emaciated, very thin. And it's taken a toll on especially Leonardo as he worries not only about the city and this war that the district attorney Hell has basically waged against the turtles and turning the people against them, but particularly his brothers and particularly Donatello. Donnie just hasn't been in a good place, and he basically follows Donnie around as Donnie goes and volunteers at a soup kitchen and goes out and protect people from Foot Clan and these criminals who are now wearing masks to basically turn the city continually against the turtles and thinking and making them think that they're being attacked by mutants. But he continues to keep an eye on his brother, not knowing that Donnie knows he's there. And we see early as he's talking about the issues with Donnie, you know, he talks about how Donnie wants everyone is back and he goes to rest. He goes in this little spot which is closed off to everyone else and he hears him cry all the time. And he doesn't talk to his brothers. The only person, the only thing that he talks to is Splinter, who is this dead rat that he found in issue 4, who he was a friend and eventually it got killed. And he thought it was Splinter, and he still thinks that it's Splinter, and he's hearing voices thinking that it's Splinter who is speaking to him. But we see as we get near the end of the issue, again, he's keeping an eye on Donnie, and Donnie eventually calls him out and says, I know you're there, but, I know what I'm doing. I am doing what Master Splinter is asking me to do. And, you know, Leonardo is trying to really get him to understand that that's a dead rat you're talking to. We really want to help you. You're not in the right mind right now. We're not going to win if we're not together in all this. And, they fight it out. And, Donnie leaves. He actually jumps off the building to save the dead rat. And once we get to the end of the issue, the brothers have returned from their nightly patrol of the city, and Leo goes to talk to Donnie, and as he does so, he comes to realize that Donnie's not there. The only thing that is there is the dead rat and a note from Donnie asking his brothers to keep an eye on Splinter. But it is at that point Donnie is hearing this voice or this weeping that he thought was Donnie. Leonardo thought it was Donnie that was, crying on a monthly basis, at on a daily basis as they, came home into the sewers from their nightly patrols. But now Donnie is gone, but he's still hearing this crying and this weeping. And the next thing you know, Leonardo falls to his knees and he realizes the weeping that he's hearing is Splinter. And he tells the dead rat that he's listening. So I don't know how to take that, especially knowing that Donnie has gone to turn himself in. He's walked up to the district attorney's office at the courthouse, and he's turning himself into the Foot Clan. But oh man, it's going to be something as we get to this next issue to see what exactly is going on now with Leonardo as he hears this voice as well. But man, I am loving this. I can't wait to get the next issue. But that is my number one book for this week. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 8 from Jason Aaron and Juan Ferreira over at IDW. And so, there you have it. My top 5 books for this past week. Gatchaman, Only One Earth, number 3. I Like Popeye, number 4. Wonder Woman, number 20. Star Trek Defiant, number 26. And my top book for this week, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, number 8. So, before heading out, let's go ahead and mention my honorable mentions for this week. These are the books that I read that were really good, just not good enough to crack the top 5. Coming up first, Detective Comics number 1096 from Tom Taylor and Mikhail Janin. We get the end of the first arc on Tom Taylor's run on the series, and we find out the identity of Asima. I predicted that it was going to be Scarlett's mother, Evelyn, and that's exactly who it is. So that turned out to be the case. But we also get to mention and we see someone who is tied to Elixir, and he is someone that we've seen before hanging out with Vandal Savage. So we are seeing story runs getting tied together now. So we will see who this guy is. He goes by the name of Ambrose. Only Ambrose I'm always been familiar with on the DC side of things was actually, I want to say he was either with the Authority or with Checkmate. And so we will see. I don't think it's the same guy, but hey, we know how things can sometimes be retconned in comics. So we'll see if that is the case. Then coming up after that, we have Absolute Flash #2 from Jeff Lemire with art from Nick Robles, also at DC Comics. Uh, while he's still trying to get a grasp of these new powers of his, he really doesn't want them, first of all, but he's just trying to get a grasp to knowing where he is. He really wants to go home. But what we also see in this is that he is phasing in and out of space and time. And, if you can remember in the last issue, in issue 1, there was this explosion that we assumed killed Barry Allen. But as Wally is doing this fading in and out, he is fading out into different periods of time, including a period in time where Barry is actually alive and trying to save Wally and stop him from doing this phasing that he's going through. And so we shall see how all of that plays out, especially considering that the Rogues have Grodd at their disposal. And yeah, this Grodd looks a little bit different than what we're used to. He's not the huge gorilla of the normal continuity. The Grodd of this universe and the Absolute Universe looks quite different. So we shall see how that plays out. Then next up, we have Ultimate Wolverine #4 over at Marvel Comics from Chris Condon and Alessandro Cappuccio. This is a follow-up to the previous issue where Logan has his encounter with Kitty Pryde, who somehow starts to draw some of Logan's hidden memories from, bringing back to light. And we see this story almost like a fable of sorts that kind of ties in what Logan is going through with these animals who are fighting each other. But in the end, we get the big reveal that part of what the Eurasian district is using to keep Winter Soldier in check is basically constantly wiping his mind again. So it was revealed it wasn't the first time that they've had to do this, but the being that they are using to make this happen looks like Jean Grey, and they refer to this being as the Phoenix Force. So we shall see how that plays out come issue #5, which is out next month. But I found that to be really interesting. And then we're going to go on back to DC Comics, and we're going to talk about, we're going to talk a little bit about Summer of Superman #1. This was written by Joshua Williamson, Mark Waid, and Dan Slott. Dan Slott is now over at DC. He's going to be doing some Superman stuff in this Summer of Superman event that DC is doing. But we also get art from Jorge Jimenez, Belen Ortega, and Dan Moore. But in this story, we get the wedding of Lana Lang and John Henry Irons. So they finally jump the broom and get hitched. So that was a good thing to see. But the big thing that comes at the end is we finally get confirmation that Booster Gold is alive. And he's alive in the Absolute Universe. So, and we also see that he is kind of behind some of these attacks, quote unquote, that Superman has been encountering throughout his life, we see that this has kind of been a plot by Booster to try to get a signal to the team that he is alive and, trying to warn them of what is to come. So we shall see how all of that plays out. It's going to be happening in the pages of Superman with regards to this epilogue that was in the Summer of Superman special. So we'll see how all of that works. And then finally, over at Dynamite Entertainment, we have Thundercats number 14 from Declan Shelby with art from Drew Moss. This was an okay issue from a story aspect. I really enjoyed it. I am still having somewhat of an issue with the art. I am not all that crazy about the way that the Thundercats are being drawn. However, I will chalk that up to the 80s child in me. Again, I remember watching Thundercats as a kid on after school and on Saturdays when it was on Saturdays as well. And so I always see the Thundercats in a particular type of way. And Drew Moss, of course, has his own style of art. I'm not that crazy about it. I'm more of a nostalgic, give me my traditional Thundercats look. But the story was really good. They're trying to find Lion-O. They encounter Mumra in his monster form, and they have a battle with them. And we get some new allies that pop up, including a returning Calica, who returns and brings the team the Eye of Thundera, which she took back several issues ago. And we find out that she did so because Jaga told her to. And yeah, we'll see how issue number 15 plays out when it comes out. But I enjoy the issue. Again, I just need to get used to the art style. That's not something I'm used to when it comes to looking at the Thundercats. But again, it was a good story that I enjoyed. But there you have it, my honorable mentions for this past week, and I hope you enjoy them as well. So, that is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Bin Podcast. I want to thank you all for your support. Next time I am sitting down with Stephanie Williams. I know she and I were supposed to sit down a few weeks ago, but she was down under the weather, so we rescheduled, and I was finally able to sit with her, and we talk about a bunch of her projects that she's doing and just her inspiration with comics and things of that nature. Yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation. I've been following her for quite a while and had a good conversation. And so be on the lookout for that next week. And of course, we'll be talking about my top 5 for books that are out this coming Wednesday. So I truly appreciate you joining me again this episode, and I will see you all next time. That is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for your continued support of the program. The Comic Bin Podcast, as well as the Comic Book Spot, are a part of the Comic Book Source family of sites and media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter X at comic_bin, or my personal account at BatmanFan_4life. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. We're all over social media. You can also follow our sister site over at thebatmanuniverse.net for all of your news and reviews in the world of Batman. Tune in next time as we give you more in the world of comic books. Again, we truly appreciate your support. But until we meet again next time, keep reading those comics.